So if you are a student, then exam season is probably coming up soon. This is why in this video I want to tell you about this book right here, which is the single best book I ever read about studying and learning, and it has just made me study smarter instead of studying harder and got me through so many exams. This is why in this video I want to tell you more about this book. And the author of this book is Barbara Oakley, and what is so remarkable about her is that she actually initially hated math and hated engineering absolutely. This book is by no means all about math and science, etc. It can be applied to every subject out there, but this was just at that time her given weak spot. And when she was in high school and university, she did never really like math, she did never do math, she flunked at math and algebra and skipped every math and science class she could, and instead actually got a degree in Slavic languages and worked for a couple of years actually as a Russian translator in the US Army, and never had anything to do with math, which she was very glad about. But one day she realized that her job opportunities were just super small in this given field, and she thought about what she could do else instead. And eventually she got the idea that actually being able to do math and pursuing a job in this field would actually give her way better chances to getting a good, well-paying job for her in the future, which is why she actually, although she hated math in the beginning in her high school and university years, started to on her own study math and study engineering. She was so passionate and dedicated and just stuck to it that eventually, although she was super bad at it, actually got a PhD in engineering and is now a professor at the University at Oakland. And because of this phenomenal shift in academic performance, she actually created a very popular online course called Learning How to Learn. And this book right here is basically the book version of it. And this is why in this video I want to tell you what I learned from this book and how this really opened my eyes and made me study smarter instead of harder. And there are many things that are covered in this book, but the main idea that really opened my eyes and has been such a game changer for me has been to understand the difference between the two main types of learning, which previously I didn't really know about. And in her book, Barbara Oakley explains that there are two main types of learning that take place in your brain: active learning and diffused learning. And in this video I'm actually going to save you tons of time, because I'm not talking about the active learning part, because this is what you already know. Put in the effort, don't procrastinate, maybe use the Pomodoro technique. I made this video right here where I covered this as well, and really be passionate and dedicated to your studies and put in lots of effort into it. But this is only half of the equation. What has been such a game changer for me and such an eye-opener has been to understand the idea of diffused learning, because in my understanding this is basically what holds back so many people, although they actually put in the effort and study hard and do all these things. And I have been in the same position. Although really work your ass off, put in the effort and time, somehow the information you want to study doesn't stick that much. Somehow, although you try to understand these concepts, after a couple of minutes or even on the next day, all of this is gone. And the solution for that is to not only think about active learning, but about diffused learning. That means what happens after you actually close the book. Because once you put your studying material away, this is actually where the real magic happens. It's the same as going to the gym when you do a workout and train your biceps, for example. Your muscle is not going to grow during your workout, but actually in the time when you recover at night, for example, or the next day. So to understand how diffused learning actually helps you to better make that information stick into your brain, how you can actually fit all those puzzle pieces together, you really have to look at the time what you do after you're actually studying, once you close the book. And this applies to basically all subjects out there: math, social sciences, languages, etc., etc., and even to physical skills like playing sports or playing a musical instrument whatsoever. And the main problem that most people actually do is that once they do this active studying, once they actually put in the effort and do the exercises, dedicate lots of time to actually understanding and studying the subject, they will basically let all this information go to waste after it, because they're doing the wrong things after actually studying and closing the book. Because it is actually crucial for you that once you did the active learning phase, that you go into the diffused learning phase, which in simple words means that you let your brain really think about the content that you have been studying that time. Because the problem here, and the question why cramming for an exam actually never works for most people, is that you have to make that information that you actually forced into your brain go from your short-term memory after that to your long-term memory in order for you to actually be able able to utilize that information and not make it immediately go away. And let's say, for example, you studied for 2 or 3 hours and open immediately social media, open immediately YouTube, or distract yourself with whatever it is, then because, and as Barbara Oakley describes it in her book, you go from that stimulating activity like studying and immediately jump into an activity that really sucks up all of your focus, your attention, and that makes your brain produce lots of dopamine. You get distracted and your brain actually starts to think of that information you actually wanted to study as not as important, which in effect will lead to you actually forgetting basically most of the information you actually wanted to learn. And to put it in a nutshell, in order to study smarter, not harder, you have to actually go and engage in activities after you study that will make your brain think about the stuff you actually try to study, so that it goes from your short-term into your long-term memory. This process where that information goes to that long-term memory is described in the book by Barbara Oakley as the diffused learning mode. And you actually want to avoid activities directly after studying that block out that diffused learning mode. And I will show this on screen, and she actually showed a list of things that you shouldn't do and that you basically should do after studying. For example, instead of watching television, playing video games and surfing the web, which will make that information stick less, you should do things that activate your diffused mode. For example, going to the gym, playing a sport, sleeping, meditating or praying, listening to music, taking a shower, going for a drive, because all of these positive things have in common that there isn't much new information streaming into your brain when you do those activities, but it's rather like moving, physical activities, driving, doing sports, walking, or the best of all, sleeping. And due to that lack of new information coming into your brain actually has the ability to process all that information and to make it really stick. And to talk a bit more in pseudo-neuroscience terms, she described all of this basically as a pinball game in an arcade, for example. And when you do the active learning session, you, for example, let's say, this could be applied to any subject, as I said, but let's say, for example, you're studying a language and, for example, you're practicing how to conjugate words in Spanish, for example. This is one of really tons of aspects of a language that in order to speak the language fluently, you have to master. And the example she gives in her book is that when you study, for example, one given subject at a time, for example, conjugating verbs, then it's like really heavily playing pinball around the same spot in the game all the time. This means that you're actually really practicing that skill, getting really good at this isolated skill, conjugating verbs in Spanish. And what can happen if you're doing it the wrong way is that, as I said, your first day you're practicing to conjugate verbs in Spanish and you're playing pinball around this one tiny spot in the corner. And for example, the next day you're practicing the endings of words in the female and male version. And you're again playing pinball in this one tiny corner right here and getting good at that skill, but only at that skill. The next day you're practicing vocabulary and you're playing pinball in the upper part of the game. The gist of this is that when you do it the wrong way, you will develop skill in lots of areas in an isolated way. But when it comes to actually speaking the language, you fail at it because you actually missed and failed to actually link all of these skills together. Because in order to use a language, in order to do science, in order to do math, and be able to utilize different skills at the same time, because conjugating a verb is easy, but doing it at the same time subconsciously with thousands of other things, in order to really hablar español sin problemas and hacer las conexiones en tu cabeza, sorry, it is important that you actually link these different skills in your head and in your brain together. That you're not only getting good at isolated skills, but that you're getting good at many things and wiring them together so that you can utilize them at the same time and actually getting good overall, being able to use many skills and linking them together. And in the book she describes that as not only playing pinball in one area of the game, but to actually utilize the whole field and playing pinball all throughout the whole game. That means you're putting in the effort to do the conjugation, to do the adjectives, to do the endings of words, to increase your vocabulary, and that you're not only getting good at several skills themselves independently, but that you're actually playing in the whole field and linking those skills together. And this is exactly what happens when you actually enter the diffuse mode after you're studying. When you enter the diffuse mode and after studying, for example, take a nap, go for a walk, do sports, do the dishes, etc., whatever is on this list, you're actually enabling your brain to make that neural connections in your whole brain and linking this information with the existing knowledge you already have. If you don't do that, and as I said, do activities that block that diffuse mode, you will just get better at isolated skills that won't help you at all in the long term. In the book, she, for example, also describes that as building a wall, and entering the diffuse mode is actually the mortar you actually have to use to make it a solid wall and make the bricks stick to each other. I really hope that I didn't get into too much of a ramble and that you understand what I mean by that. So this is only the first point, and the second one would be to actually give your chance the brain to do exactly that jump from active to diffused learning several times a day, a week, a month, whatsoever. And each time you do that, you will actually strengthen that connection in your brain that already exists. So that means that you can boost that mechanism that I just described when you're actually trying to lay out your study sessions across the week instead of just doing it once. So instead of just studying for a subject 5 hours one day, on Monday, let's say, for example, it would actually be in your favor if you would allocate 1 hour every day to studying that subject, because then you would always have the ability to actually go back to the material, actively think about it, and go into diffuse mode again, which will each time strengthen those neural connections in your brain again, making you more prepared and giving you a more solid neural connection in your brain that will actually make you ready and enable you to actually pass that exam that you have to take. And that being said, no matter what period of time we're talking about, you would benefit if you would spread out your study session as broad as possible within that given period. If you're looking at one day, it would be best to spread out the material, to do a bit in the morning, a bit at midday, a bit in the evening. I just mentioned how you go about a week, but if you look at the month or the whole semester, for example, it would be also very wise to start early and just doing a tiny bit to, as early as possible, planting that seed in your brain and giving your brain the opportunity to actually make that neural connection grow stronger and bigger. And this is the reason why cramming just doesn't work. It is because you're giving your brain way too little time. When you're, for example, studying 1 week before the exam or 1 day before the exam, you're actually not giving your brain any possibility at all to go from short-term to long-term memory, enter the diffuse mode to make those neural connections, to play that pinball game, and actually preventing you from building up that skill that you can utilize when you're actually trying to take that exam. So, and number 3 would actually to make use of the most productive time in your brain when it comes to actually entering that diffuse mode. So let's say, for example, that you did the studying and after that you did not immediately. It is not about avoiding it altogether, it's just about that immediate phase afterwards. You avoided social media, scrolling the internet, watching TV whatsoever, that cheap dopamine immediately after studying, and instead you went for a walk, you did something in the household, you did sports, whatever, so that the information really had the opportunity to stick into your brain and make that long-term neural connections. So let's say you're doing all of that, but you're pulling off all-nighters each and every day. Okay, not maybe each and every day, then you would probably die. But let's just say that you are in an intense studying phase at the moment for several weeks whatsoever before the exams, and you're just pulling off many all-nighters. You're sleeping too little, you're constantly sleep deprived, feeling tired all the time. If this is you, then this is a direct recipe for failure and disaster, because the time you sleep, the time you actually spend asleep, is the most productive time in your brain when it actually comes to making that neural connections, when it actually comes to setting up that foundation and making that information stick into your brain. Because I said that those several activities listed here are enabling your brain to actually go into diffuse mode, and that is all right. You actually have to think about the time you spend sleeping as the absolutely same, but on drugs. You have to understand that the time you spend sleeping is not just for your body to regenerate and just feel better in your muscles and your tissues and your organs whatsoever, but the majority of things that actually happen in your sleep is that your brain makes, repairs, and strengthens all those neural connections. Your sleep is the biggest diffuse mode activator that there is. And if you're not sleeping properly, if you're sleeping too little, if you're pulling off all-nighters all the time, then you're basically resetting your memory each and every day. You're basically setting up yourself for failure because all of that hard work you did in the active phase and in the little time you've been awake in the diffused mode actually all goes to waste, because when you're not sleeping enough, all of this information will actually fade away. So the best thing that you can do is to get a solid amount of sleep each and every night. 7 to 9 hours of high quality sleep will boost your memory retention 10, 100, 1,000 times, and it's one of the single best things you can actually do to actually make that information stick into your brain and be prepared for that exam. Because for a long time people actually didn't know what is going on in the sleep. They thought that they're just basically dead, or they're just laying around. A good guess was already that your body is repairing itself, all your tissues, your cells, your muscles, whatsoever. But it goes even further, because most of what actually happens in your sleep is going on in your brain. I made a video about that a long time ago, which you can watch here. It's basically all about that, is that your brain goes to different sleep stages each and every night and cycles all throughout those sleep phases. And one of the biggest things that actually happens in your brains at night is that it sorts out the bad information and makes you forget it and empties your short-term memory. It will take all the information that your brain regards as important and that had actually been trained during the day and will put it more and more into the long-term memory. It will make all those neural connections and make sense out of it. And if you're not sleeping enough, all of that does not happen, and despite you giving your best during the day, all that memory, all that information actually goes to waste. So number 4 is actually something that you're already familiar with at this point, and it is to often practice active recall and spaced repetition. And this is basically the same we talked about earlier when it came to spreading the information and these things you have to study over a long period of time, or as much as possible at least. And you can take that even a step further and actually forcing your brain to go over stuff again and again and recalling it all the time in order to deepen those neural connections. And the single best thing you can do actually all the time is to just test yourself all the time when you're studying any given material. That you just take trial exams, trial tests all the time without looking up the information, because each and every time you do that, you're recalling the information up into your short-term memory, you're trying to solve a problem and making new neural connections, and if you do everything right and don't let that information go to waste, you're actually strengthening your whole brain, all those neural connections, all this whole pinball game in your brain even more, which prepares you even more for the exam. So great tools for that is to basically test yourself all the time, as I said. And if you're, for example, studying things like languages, vocabulary, then tools like Anki, flashcard apps are a really terrific choice, because they will really make you in the right intervals, make you go over the material over and over again, fortifying and strengthening those neural connections. All of this, what I covered up to now, was actually the biggest eye-opener, the biggest game changer for me. But as a bonus, so to speak, there are just so ridiculously many tips and tricks and cool methods in this book, which really makes this a gold mine to actually study better. And I just want to tell you quickly 4 other things that I learned in this book, which helped me a lot, which doesn't have anything to do with the rest that I covered so far. So the first one is to actually do chunking. That means breaking down a larger subject into small areas that you can actually master. And once you master each and every one, you will actually fit those puzzle pieces together. That means no matter what subject, what topic you're actually confronted with. Let's say, I don't know, I'm looking at a tree. Let's say understanding climate change. Instead of just looking at the whole picture and being confused of it, you have to break it down into the most important tiny parts of it to get a better overview. A great way, for example, is doing a mind map, making all those dots and those connections, and first of all trying to understand and dividing the whole subject into little chapters that are easily digestible. And once you master all of these little digestible pieces, you will actually have a really good grasp of the whole subject. Number 2 is again repeating the value of mistakes. I said active recall and spaced repetition is great. Don't be frustrated when you do make mistakes and you're not perfect, because this is not about being perfect. If you were perfect, then you wouldn't have to study the material. But you and I are not, which is why you have to study it. This is not a feel-good phrase, but you have to see each mistake you make as an opportunity to actually grow and be better and study better and master the subject even more, because every mistake is the opportunity for you to understand one part of the whole subject that you do not understand yet. There's no point in going over things that you do already understand, but those areas that you do not understand offer you the greatest reward, because once you master them and again eliminate all those little tiny mistakes you make, you will step by step actually master the subject. So, and talking about testing yourself and making mistakes, you have to be really cautious of the Einstellung effect, which is a term in psychology that basically means that you're going over material and you think that you know the answer already, which is why you save yourself from actually going through the whole mental process altogether. Let's say, for example, you're studying for math and you're looking at all the exercises and you're just briefly going over it. Yeah, I think I would do it like this, like that. All right. Or when the teacher is doing something in front of the class. And the biggest problem here is that many people will just think, yes, I think I know the answer, and not actually go through the whole process. So what this will do is that it won't allow you to actually strengthen those neural connections. And in many cases, you're actually wrong about your assumption. If this is, for example, a new subject, and you will actually fortify a wrong pattern of thinking. This is why just skimming exercises is oftentimes not a good idea. But instead of that, you should actually either do nothing or go through the whole process in order to really strengthen those neural connections. So the last point on our list is to actually make good use of metaphors, mnemonic hacks, and little tricks here and there that make your life easier when trying to remember difficult material. Barbara Oakley really much recommends this, and this starts, for example, with memorizing little phrases like my very excited mother just served us noodles, or how I wish I could calculate pi, in order to make difficult information stick into your brain by using tricks like memorizing easy to remember sentences that contain all the information you actually want to study. And because this is really a lot to talk about, I made a specific video up here that you can watch here, where I show you the most important tricks and hacks, how you can actually make difficult information stick into your brain by using mnemonic hacks and many other tricks and tips that many champions at the USA National Memory Championships actually use in order to, for example, memorize hundreds of names, 2 decks of cards and things like that within 15 minutes. So make sure to watch this video right here to never forget difficult material again. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully see you the next time.